My call with Health BC, November 16th or 17th, 2020.
For calling Service BC. We are experiencing high call volumes due to inquiries regarding coronavirus COVID-19. If you are calling about the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, please call Service Canada at 1-800-622-6232. If you have a quick question, text us at 1-604-660-2421. Otherwise, please stay on the line and a customer service representative will assist you. If you are calling about coronavirus COVID-19, please press 1. If you are calling about speculation and vacancy tax, please press 2. If you are calling about MSP or pharmacare, press 3. If you are calling about the Affordable Child Care Benefit, press 4. For all other inquiries, please hold. Thank you for calling Service BC. If you or a family member are currently experiencing symptoms and require health advice, please press 1. Otherwise, stay on the line, and our next available agent will be with you as soon as possible.
Diarrhea. Pneumonia. Influenza.
Your call may be recorded for quality assurance and training purposes.
They better fuck it through your...
Good afternoon. You've reached Service BC. My name is Cayman. How can I help you today?
I'm on a quest.
Okay.
I have scoured the BC CDC's website. I've spoken with my regional health or my local health authority. I've even phoned Health Canada, and I've also phoned NRCan and the National Institute of Health, whatever. It's the governing body which gives out grants and stuff for research. National Research Institute Health Alliance or something like that. Anyways.
It's the Health Research Institute of Infection and Immunity?
It's NIHR, I think it's what it's called. But yeah, so anyways, I've called them, I've emailed them, I've got replies and stuff back, but I'm having a really, really difficult time trying to find actual peer-reviewed evidence or studies for healthy populations wearing masks and healthy populations practicing social distancing.
Okay.
So, and this is really, really problematic because in my research, there was way back in the time machine, there was a study that was mentioned which 12 of the major news networks in North America, and I think one in the UK, had cited on social distancing. And I looked at the study, and it actually is on the CDC's website down in the States, but it's not peer-reviewed. It's a research paper which was started by a 14-year-old girl named Laura Glass, who completed it when she was 15, and they used a model. Okay, her father was the principal author on it. I think his name was Philip Glass. In any event, this became the basis for mandates on social distancing, which is really kind of weird because every single epidemiologist out there has torn this to shreds, but yet we're still using it. There's still, in my estimation, still zero actual peer-reviewed or scientific evidence proving that social distancing actually works. Now, the asymptomatic thing, even the droplet study, which was primarily cited through the Skagit County Health Authority, was about the super spreader event with the choir singers, has turned out to be kind of weird because, well, I can go into great detail on how to pick that apart, but again, it was never properly peer-reviewed. It was also misquoted, and the University of Pennsylvania, the UPenn epidemiological health work group had found out that there's still, that Skagit County study came out earlier in the year, and then in August, the UPenn study came out and said, no, this is actually not correct, and there's still no actual studies, peer-reviewed studies on social distancing. And in fact, the only one that they tried to cite was a study in China, which was basically about the squatty potties. You actually have a higher chance of getting COVID from squatty potties than you do from social distancing, which I thought was kind of bizarre. So, I'm mistaken. You actually, the transmission, you have a higher chance of getting COVID through droplets or whatever through the squatty potties than you do from singing. And I'm a musician, and I have many, many friends all over the world, but I have, out of the thousands of friends that I have, I've got roughly between 250 to 300 friends and family and exes and whatnot who are a combination of either epidemiologists, virologists, doctors, professors in related fields, nurses, occupational health and safety pros, respiratory therapists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all kind of on the same board, and I'm not trying to politicize this in any way, so please don't assume that I am. I'm not going to mention any leaders' names because this isn't about politics. This is about understanding science and making sure that the proper science is being used. Because right now, we're only being told one side of the story, and there's a lot of negative consequences which can develop because of this. And this is hence the reason for my call. Because, again, there's still no scientific evidence or any actual peer-reviewed studies on social distancing. The droplet study has been highly torn apart. And then the face masks, there are no peer-reviewed studies at all on healthy people wearing face masks, but there are tons and tons of studies which don't use models. Okay, this is a very, very important thing. The studies on all the negative health effects of wearing masks is actually outweighs the studies where they're using models by a factor of something like 80 to 1 or 180 to 1. I can't remember the exact number, so I don't want to quote that to you. So basically, now we're getting pushed into these lockdowns, but there's a big problem because with the RT-PCR test kits that we're using, and I don't know what cycle ratio that they're using. If they're using the PCR test kits at 40 cycles, you're guaranteed to get a false positive or positive, and that's just how it goes. Because now you're dealing with either billions or trillions of cycles throughout the process, which you're bound to find something. But if you've had a flu shot, like I had a couple friends try this, okay, just as an experiment. They're healthy as hell, but one of my friends had had a flu vaccine last year, healthy as hell, was super afraid, stayed inside, didn't go out, and then decided to go get a test, and he tested positive. And he wasn't around anybody, which is really weird, right? And he masked up when he did to his shopping. He practiced his social distancing, did everything, wore gloves, okay? Like he was like almost ready to go in a hazmat suit. His test came back positive, and it created a situation where he had to go on antidepressant meds because he thought that he was going to kill his grandma and all this other stuff. And we're trying to console him and say, okay, listen, you have to understand the whole process in terms of how the PCR test kit works. Even the inventor, Kerry Mullis, who invented it in 1986 and then received a Nobel Prize for it in 93, has stated, and I quote, I said, for research purposes only, not for diagnostic procedures. So this is a big problem. The only reason why we're using these RT-PCR test kits right now in the first place was because of the February 3rd FDA EUA. So EUA is Emergency Use Authorization. Now, there are currently 286 companies who manufacture RT-PCR test kits. But if you remove and the only reason why we have them the only reason why they're approved in Canada or through Health Canada was because of the February 3rd EUA from the FDA. Now, the biggest problem with EUAs is that typically everything is about research and vetting, okay? It takes 2 years for something to get approved by the FDA on average. So when you implement an EUA, you are bypassing all these necessary vetting and rigorous studies which essentially go on. So that's a big problem because now we've spent billions of taxpayer dollars on these test kits only to find out that they're not really effective. On top of that, there's been now 34 Freedom of Information requests which have come out regarding the isolation or purification of the actual virus. Now, so they've never actually isolated from an alleged sick patient or the first patient and being able to determine whether or not, it's never been isolated, okay, or purified. They've mapped the genome with a model. Now, models are a huge problem, and models are essentially what got us into a problem in the first place. If you look back to Neil Ferguson and the Imperial College of London back in early January, the UK government was had mentioned that COVID-19 was classified as an HCID. That's a high consequences or highly classified infectious disease. Now, up until March 16th, the UK was following Sweden's moderate lockdown measures, or like they didn't shut down the economy, they didn't shut down their country, they didn't do anything. They just said, let's be smart about it. If you don't have to go see your grandparents or whatever, don't go see them if you're sick. And which is common sense, because we've used this same analogy for decades, okay? When I was a child, if I was sick, I couldn't go see my grandparents. If my grandparents were sick, they couldn't come see me. If you coughed on your hands, you'd wash your hands, typically. So basic common sense, okay? But you see, so up until March 16th, the UK was following Sweden's actual smart common sense measures. But on March 16th, Ferguson and his guys at Imperial College had went and cranked up what I call their magical antiquated modeling machine, aka MAM, and did what no other epidemiologist in the world was doing, and they opted to say, okay, what happens if we don't do a full lockdown? What are the results? And the results, and I don't know if you are aware of this, but 510,000 people in the UK would die, up to 2.2 million people in the States would die, 440,000 people in Canada would die, and about 400,000 plus in Sweden would die. Okay, well, people took that, the news agencies went off, but the problem is 3 days later, the Imperial College did another study, and they ran it through their MAM machine, and they found out that, well, no, that was downgraded to 25,000 deaths. The UK NHS actually had updated this on their website on March 21st, and not one of the media outlets had reported this. So now, typically, we follow a lot what the British government has done before in the past. We're part of the Commonwealth, and I respect that, right? What I don't respect is the absolute ignorance when it comes to looking at every bit of evidence. Like, we're now being basically brandished or tarnished, or whatever term you want to use, in terms of if we're trying to question this, we get blackballed, we get ostracized, we get marginalized. Hell, we've got some of the top experts in epidemiology and virology now stepping out and saying, wait a minute, lockdowns are not the right way to go. Masks are actually do more harm than good. There is no scientific evidence behind social distancing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but they're being marginalized. We in this province, for example, we're not allowed to question our chief medical health officer. There's no conversation that's going on here, and that's not how science works. Science needs debate, right? Rather than, you see, like, I question what Health BC did on this. Is, okay, what was your risk-benefit analysis? What also was done in terms of what's the exit plan? Because according to Dr. Tam on one of her morning press conferences about, I'd say, 5 weeks ago, she had mentioned that we had flattened the curve months ago, but we have to remain vigilant until there's a vaccine. But there's a problem. We've got a recovery rate of close to 100%. And with the studies that came out from Pfizer and Moderna, they do not have a 90 or a 95% efficacy rate. Because if you look at the actual studies, which I did, you'll notice that on the Pfizer study, for example, there was 43,538 patients enrolled in this. But they cherry-picked that study down to 94 people, and out of that, they wound up saying, okay, well, we had 9 people who did this and 4 people who did this, therefore we have a 90% efficacy rate. Well, that's not how science works. Hell, that's not how even stats work, okay? The same thing applies to Moderna, which has its own problems, because based on a patent that came out March 18th or 28th of last year, 2019, there was a little clause that was kind of slotted into their patent application. And it says, because of the likelihood of a SARS coronavirus outbreak, vaccine development has been initiated. Now, I can send all this information to you guys, because I've actually read the patents. Like, the patents for coronaviruses, for example, go as far back to 2003 with the CDC, NIH. And there's 2 different patents on that. One was the transmission of coronaviruses to humans, and the other one was a test kit to be able to test for coronavirus. Now, the CDC and NIH and NIAID have had 17 years now to be able to try to find a vaccine for the first SARS. They were not able to do it. The animal trials all had 100% death rates, which is a massive problem, which is probably why they skipped the animal trials on this round of vaccine trials, because you're going to kill all the animals, and then if you publish those studies, well, it just shows. But if you look at a 2016 WHO report, they actually changed the guidelines on how to do vaccine research, which basically, I won't get into that one fully, but that is also easily found online through the WHO site. So we're now at a point where I've spent probably 6,000 plus hours since early March when this all came out, looking at every single possible angle, both what the government is telling me and both what the actual experts are telling me. And my conclusion is that the government is not basing this on any rational science. Hell, they're not even basing it on peer-reviewed science. So with that said, how is it that our government can make these mandates, create all this divide and conquer, basically crush our economy? I've lost $100,000 in gigs this year because I wasn't able to play because of COVID. Now, it's not making sense. Like, if you look at even through things like the Great Barrington Declaration, which is taking a little bit of heat, but you've got a top epidemiologist from Oxford, you got a top epidemiologist from Stanford, and a top epidemiologist from Harvard, all saying that lockdowns were not the right way to go. So if these three people, plus many others on it, are saying that this is not the way to go, and then they have the science to prove it, and then they have the science to prove against about the negative health effects of masks, and they have the science to prove that social distancing doesn't work, how is it that BC becomes different from the rest of the world? How is it that COVID is different in BC than it is in Sweden, or in the States, or in the UK, or in 40 countries which didn't have any deaths at all? How is it that the Vatican City, which has a population of 618 people, had 13 coronavirus cases and 0 deaths? So there's a ton of questions. Even Belarus didn't go through the major lockdowns. Vietnam has a population of 95 million people. They didn't lock down. They didn't do masks. They didn't do social distancing. They had a total of 35 or 65 deaths. Japan didn't go through crazy measures, and the test kits or masks or whatever which was sent to them all turned out to be wrong. Actually, it was, I think, the masks which were sent to them, and they were all like too small. So they had to send them back. So, and I've got a bunch of friends who live in Japan, and they're like, it's not as bad as what people are saying it is, and we're still living our life normally, and our economy hasn't been crushed. So now we're in a position where I'm actually having to spend time talking with you, trying to find some answers to my questions, because I'm seriously at wit's end right now. I'm aghast. I'm dumbfounded. I cannot.
I don't have the answers.
So, but you are representing a body which is supposed to be able to give us answers or give us information, and the information that you're giving to us is not based on sound science. This is the problem. So you're.
What I can suggest is all the information you've gathered.
Yeah.
Package that up, send it on to the to the health minister's office.
Who's the health minister right now?
Adrian Dix.
Oh, he still is.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have Adrian Dix's email?
Does he have an email? Let me find out.
You better.
Have they? Okay. Where else am I gonna find it then? Normally you'd find this stuff on the legislature website, but they're updating it or something, or there's some sort of network issue, and the website's down. Normally it's right there on ledge.bc.ca. Let's see here. BC. Oh, of course. HLTH.minister@gov't.bc.ca. Duh.
Okay. See, here's the other problem is I have a medical exemption from wearing a mask. Okay, I've tried to wear one, and I started having an asthma attack within 30 seconds. And my question is, I've been dealing with other businesses on this who are trying to mandate masks, and they're saying our mandate is based on the government advisories. And I'm like, well, it's still not a law. And then there's fines.
And we've been told that there are no plans to make masks mandatory.
Well, BC Paris has a mask mandate. You better get in touch with them. Van City, as you can't go into their branches without wearing a mask. Loblaws has a mask mandate, so that's your superstore, your Shoppers Drug Mart, your independent grocers, and stuff like this. So there's a lot of companies, and And trust me, I've contacted them and I've asked them and I've emailed and said, okay, where are you getting your guidelines from? What is your justification for these mandates? Well, we're getting it from the government website or Health BC. And so, well, okay, but then Health BC says, well, these aren't laws, which I agree with. They're not. They haven't been passed. They haven't been voted on. These are just it's an advisory. You know, we're not in a pandemic. We're not in an epidemic. We're not even in a public health scare yet. If this disease or virus, whatever you want to call it, was as bad as they say it was, no one would be allowed outside. Period. Okay, everything would be shut down. All our food and supplies would be delivered to us by the military in hazmat suits and full face respirators. Okay, with like little O2 things in the back, and we would have everybody would have to have decontamination. Like chambers set up in their house to come in and come out of your house. But that hasn't happened. Okay, so again, this is why I question the science. This is why I'm posing the questions to you. This is why I hope that this conversation is being recorded so it can be moved up the food chain, because I went through 4 different levels of the CDC here in BC in order to try to get the answers, right? And everybody I called and said, please check out the BCCD's website on this. And my request was simple. Please provide the evidence for healthy people wearing masks, and please provide the evidence for healthy people practicing social distancing. And they also checked the BCCD's website. Well, I checked it, and it doesn't exist. So when I got to level 4 BCCDC on their food chain there, I said, listen, I've scoured your website, and trust me, I've spent decades in research, and I understand, and I know how to maneuver through websites with relative ease, and I also know how to do searches and everything else. But when you do not have the evidence to back up the statements that you guys are making, like the whole social distancing, the 6+1, the super spreader, all this stuff has been, well, I won't say debunked because that would start politicizing it. It has all been proven by actual science, okay? I'll give you an example. I was playing at a party in mid-July. There was 200 people there. It was kind of an indoor-outdoor thing. There was a big buffet. There was a big food roast. And we had about 200 people, all ages there. Only one person was wearing a mask, and that was one of my guitar player's sons, who was like 17, 18. And he was taking photographs. And he wore the mask for the first 15, 20 minutes. And then when he looked around and noticed all these kids and seniors and 40-somethings and 20-somethings and 30-somethings not really giving a shit and living their life, he took his mask off. Well, since then, not one person was there one reported case. Okay, there was not any deaths from this because we decided to make sure that everybody stayed in place. So we actually did our own randomized control trial. Okay, unbeknownst to everybody else, but we decided we kept it quiet because we didn't want to have to deal with any of the blowback of people trying to marginalize or ostracize us or call us names. We just decided, okay, let's see how this goes, right? And that was back in July, where the death numbers were much higher than what they are. We have a spike in cases right now, and it's also, if you look at the CDC's report from a month ago, where they had, what is it? If you always wore a mask, you had a 70.6% chance of getting sick. If you frequently wore a mask, you had a 14 to 16% chance of getting sick, compared to if you never wore a mask, you have a 3.9% chance of getting sick. But even that 3.9% number is suspect, because did that person have any underlying conditions? Were there any comorbidities? And I'm asking, my next question is, I want to see, with all the deaths that we've had in BC, how many had comorbidities? Because through the CDC study that came out as well, another one where they said 94% of all the COVID deaths had 2.6 comorbidities. So if you factor that in, let's say 250,000, that's like about 12,000 people who didn't have any comorbidities. But then if you look at 2 very, very important documents from the CDC and DSS, and one was COVID Alert number 2 on March 24th, and the other one was COVID Alert number 3 on April 2nd. This is basically the death code, which they were to label deaths as COVID deaths, and the second one was outlining, even without a positive test result, if you suspect this person to have COVID or the symptoms, they are to be labeled as a COVID death. Okay, well, there was a guy who had a 0.55 blood alcohol level. His cause of death was COVID. There were people that shot in the head. Their cause of death was COVID. If you get hit by a vehicle, your cause of death was COVID. If you have a heart attack, your cause of death was COVID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are 1 million doctors in the States, but it's very, very easy to see that if you look at how much money Big Pharma is putting into medical advertising, that they spend $30 billion a year on medical advertising. Out of that $30 billion, $20 billion goes to sway doctors. So you only need to get 50 or 100 or 1,000 doctors to be able to start scrubbing death certs in order to be able to kind of fill in or kind of fit in. But then when you start looking at, okay, well, you're getting more money because you're labeling somebody as a COVID case, and you're getting even more money if you label them as a death, and you get more money if you put them on event. Well, this has all been proven, sadly, and there have been admissions from